Welcome to Kit's Rock Review. Here we go, everybody. It's Kit's Rock Review. There's me. There's my friends, Susan Tedeschi and Derek Trucks. This is Kit's Rock Review. This is being recorded for the BarRoom Neon Project and their Halloween/Harvest Moon show. So I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing a government wheel t-shirt and it's got a skull on it. We're going to be thematic. And to be thematic, what we're going to do is today's topic is cover songs that people don't realize are cover songs. So, you know, because on Halloween, people like to dress up, pretend they're something else. Sometimes rock musicians like to do that as well. They like to pretend they're somebody else. And when rock musicians record or perform a song that they didn't write, it's called a cover song. And there's a whole history to why that term is the way it is, but we're not going to get into the history of that term. Just to, you know, if you hear the term a cover song, it means that the song was recorded by somebody else and a different artist is doing it. In fact, sometimes those cover songs become so popular that people don't realize they're cover songs. They become associated with another artist that people think that they were the originator of that song. But that's not always the case. And so today I'm going to give you 10 songs that people don't realize that were cover songs, that people don't realize are cover songs because they became so much more associated with the other group that did them. However, before we begin, I do want you to not forget, if you're on Facebook, please like and follow Kit's Rock Review and like and follow the BarRoom Neon Project. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe to Kit's Rock Review and like and subscribe to the BarRoom Neon Project. But before I get to my list, I have a recommendation for you. I would like to recommend Georgia Blue by Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit. That's what the album looks like. This album was recorded in 2020, and it consists of covers. See, we're being thematic here too. It consists of covers that Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit did, and all the artists they covered on this record are from Georgia. It includes 2 songs by REM. They're from Athens, Georgia. A song by the Allman Brothers from Macon, Georgia. From the Black Crowes from Atlanta, Georgia. Got a song by Otis Redding on there. Got a song by the Indigo Girls. They even got a song by Gladys Knight and the Pips, Midnight Train to Georgia. On there, there are some guests, not just the 400 Unit is on there, but there are some guests. Steve Gorman, who used to be the drummer in the Black Crowes. He plays drums on their cover of Sometime Salvation. And if you don't like Jason Isbell, the 400 Unit, or you're a little wary of covers albums, all the money that they make from the sale of this, Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit donate to charity. So that's a reason to buy it itself. I like this album. I've been listening to it for like the last week since I got it. So I recommend it to you. Pick it up. Georgia Blue by Jason Isbell and the 400 Unit. Okay, so let's get to our list of songs that are cover songs that people don't realize are cover songs. And just so you know, this is not a definitive list. It's just a list of songs that I thought when I was making this. And I just put them in alphabetical order. Okay? So we're going to start with the letter A. And we got All Along the Watchtower, which is made famous by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. But it was originally done by Bob Dylan. In fact, it comes from Bob Dylan's 1966 album, John Wesley Harding. And the Bob Dylan version, it's a very acoustic song, and it's a conversation between a joker and a thief. Listen to the lyrics. However, less than 6 months after Bob Dylan recorded and released that song, the Jimi Hendrix Experience recorded and released that song. And their version, obviously, is a very electrified version. They released it as a single. It went to number 20 in the US charts. And everybody now thinks that Jimi Hendrix originated the song when we all know it was originally Bob Dylan. However, Bob Dylan heard Jimi Hendrix's version, obviously, makes money off the royalties, and he likes the Jimi Hendrix version so much that when he's on tour, he plays an electrified version that owes more of its essence, should we say, to the Jimi Hendrix version than it does to the Bob Dylan version, and he's the one that wrote the song. Okay, next up, we got Black Magic Woman. Everyone's heard it from Santana, but it was originally by Fleetwood Mac. For those of you who don't know, before Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined Fleetwood Mac in the mid-70s, Fleetwood Mac was a British psychedelic blues band led by a guitarist named Peter Green, and he wrote this song about an ex-girlfriend of his. His ex-girlfriend had the nickname called Magic Mama, so he wrote a song called Black Magic Woman about her. It was never released on a proper Fleetwood Mac album, but it was released as a single, and in the UK it went to number 37. Later in 1970, Santana, the band, heard the song, and they recorded it for their 1970 album, Abraxas, and it was sung by the lead singer and keyboard player for Santana, Greg Rowley. Another little aside, for those that don't know this, Greg Rowley was also the original lead singer and keyboard player for the band Journey, because Journey was formed by members of Santana. Anyway, their version of Black Magic Woman went on to hit the US charts. It went up to number 4. And despite the fact that it became more and more associated with Santana than it became with Fleetwood Mac, especially after Peter Green left the band, both groups have kept it as part of their live repertoire. And I don't know how on which tours Fleetwood Mac has played the song, but I do know that on their last tour in 2018 to 2019, they were playing Black Magic Woman. But another notable, interesting thing is in 1998, Fleetwood Mac and Santana were both inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on the same night. Santana played Black Magic Woman, and they invited Peter Green of Fleetwood Mac, who was inducted with Fleetwood Mac, invited him to play Black Magic Woman with them, and it ended up being a very awesome 8-minute version of the song. It's on YouTube. It's on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame website. After the BarRoom Project show tonight, after you listen to Kit's Rock Review, go check it out. It's an awesome version of Black Magic Woman. Okay, up next, we got Feeling All Right. Everyone knows the Joe Cocker version of this song. However, it was not originally a Joe Cocker song. It was originally done by Traffic, and Traffic is the band that Steve Winwood formed after he left the Spencer Davis Group. The song was written not by Steve Winwood. It was written by Dave Mason, who was the guitarist for Traffic. They released it as a single, didn't really go anywhere. Joe Cocker heard it, liked the song, liked the arrangement, so he recorded his own version for his album With a Little Help from My Friends, which also features his version of the Beatles song With a Little Help from My Friends. And it did make the charts when he first released it. He re-released it later, and it was even a bigger hit. And that's the version everyone knows of Feeling All Right. Not the Traffic version, but the Joe Cocker version. Later on, he was on Saturday Night Live on the second season of Saturday Night Live, and he was singing the song, and John Belushi came up and sort of did a duet with him. If you can find that clip, it's a very funny clip if you can find it and check it out. Okay, so we're going from Joe Cocker to George Harrison. So, Got My Mind Set on You. A lot of people don't realize this is actually a cover. George Harrison, before the Beatles became famous, was this little teenager, I should say, visiting his sister. His sister had married an American serviceman and was living in Illinois. Went over to the States to visit her before the Beatles became famous. And what does he do? He goes into the local record store, flips through the records, which is what people used to do. Anyways, flipping through the records, comes across this song called Got My Mind Set on You by James Ray, likes it, buys the album, takes it back home, and keeps it as part of his record collection. Later on in 1987, when he's recording his album Cloud 9, he remembers the song and decides to cover it. And it's actually released as the first single from Cloud 9, went on to become #1 in the pop charts. The last song by any of the Beatles to hit #1 in the charts was Got My Mind Set on You, a cover song. Not only that, the same week that the Beatles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Got My Mind Set on You was the #1 song in the US. So George Harrison is one of the few people to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame while still having a current hit single. Because you have to be, I've recorded 25 years. You can't be inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame until 25 years after your first recording. So that's a little symbolic, I think. We've got my mind set on you. Next up, we have Hound Dog, which everyone knows the Elvis Presley version, but it was not originally an Elvis Presley song. It was originally recorded by Big Mama Thornton. And the story behind the song goes like this. In 1952, two young aspiring songwriters, Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, attended a concert by Big Mama Thornton. And they were so impressed with her style, they wanted to write a song for her. So they did. They wrote a song called Hound Dog, gave it to her, she recorded it. Her version sold 500,000 copies and spent 14 weeks on the R&B charts at #1. I hope that's what my handwriting says. Anyway, I mean, it was on the R&B charts for 14 weeks. I don't necessarily know if it was #1 for 14 weeks, but it did make #1. A lot of other groups. Her version was very famous in the early 50s. A lot of other groups covered it, including a group called Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys. When Elvis was on tour, he heard Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys version. He liked their version and decided to cover their version. So he's covering a cover of a cover. He knew of Big Mama Thornton's version, but he didn't feel he could do it justice. He felt the way Big Mama Thornton did it was Big Mama Thornton's version. So he liked Hound Dog. He did his own version based on a different group. His version, after he released it as a single, was actually originally the B-side, believe it or not. Hound Dog was a B-side to Don't Be Cruel. And then disc jockeys back in the day sometimes would flip it and they play the B-side. Anyway, his version of Hound Dog went on to sell 10 million copies. And it was also, at one time, 1 week, I don't know, maybe several weeks, it was #1, the #1 single. It was the #1 pop song, the #1 country song, and the #1 R&B song all at the same time. So it's considered one of the songs, Hound Dog, either by Big Mama Thornton or by Elvis, has been considered one of the songs that shaped rock and roll. I actually read that the Big Mama Thornton version has been preserved in the Library of Congress as a recording that is influential in music history. So that's Hound Dog. Let's move on to I Love Rock and Roll. Some people think this should be my theme song, but it's actually the signature song of Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, although she didn't write it, nor did any member of the Blackhearts. It was originally written by this British-American band called Arrow, and they wrote it in response to, it was written in 1975, they wrote it in response to the Rolling Stones' It's Only Rock and Roll, which is about how fame can be fleeting, and they're like, yeah, but I love rock and roll. Anyway, when Joan Jett was a young musician with her first band, the Runaways, which also consisted of Lita Ford, they were on tour in Britain, and she happened to catch Arrow playing the song I Love Rock and Roll on TV, a TV performance. And she remembered it. She was like, that sounds like something I should record. So when the Runaways broke up and she formed the Blackhearts, she did, for her first album, record I Love Rock and Roll. And it became her signature song. I mean, you don't think of Joan Jett and the Blackhearts without thinking of I Love Rock and Roll. And the early black and white video that was on the early days of MTV. Little sad note, the original Arrow vocalist, Alan Merrill, he died of COVID in 2020. When he did die of COVID in 2020, Joan Jett wrote a little tribute to him, and in that tribute, she thanked him for writing the song and thanked him for her career, because she says if it wasn't for Arrow and I Love Rock and Roll, she wouldn't have had much of a solo career. So that was really cool of her. Okay, let's move on to Respect. Everyone's heard the Aretha Franklin version, right? But she didn't write it. It was really written by Otis Redding and recorded in 1965 on his third album. If I read my notes, his third album was called Otis Blue / Otis Redding Sings Soul. And his version, the backing band for his version, by the way, were members of Booker T and the MGs. And Booker T's guitarist, Steve Cropper, actually was the producer for the song. There's a lot of horns in this version as well. Otis Redding's version is about a man who comes home, gives all his money to his woman, and says, you know, you better respect me. That's his version. Aretha Franklin heard this, and she decided to switch the pronouns around to see what it would be like. And it became a very different message, where the woman is demanding respect from the man as opposed to the man demanding respect from the woman. It sort of flips things around in our society. Anyways, as she was touring before she recorded it, her sisters were her backup singers, and they came up with where they spell it out, RESBCT, finds out what it means to me, and the socket to me. That was her sisters came up with that, and they incorporated it into the recording. It's since become, Aretha Franklin's signature song. It's since become even a feminist anthem. Barely anybody knows that it was Otis Redding that originally recorded the song. Everyone knows the Aretha Franklin. I believe the bio movie was called Respect, and the bio movie was not about Otis Redding. It was about Aretha Franklin. Anyway, so that's Respect. Up next is the Statesboro Blues, or just Statesboro Blues. Everyone's heard the Allman Brothers version, right? However, it was originally recorded by a guy named Blind Willie McTell. And look at that 12-string, that big, huge 12-string acoustic guitar that he plays. Anyway, the song was actually recorded in 1928, almost 100 years ago. It's an acoustic blues song, because they didn't have electric guitars back then. And the song tells the story of a man pleading to his woman to let him in the home. Very simple. That's what blues songs were. In the 60s, there was another blues singer named Taj Mahal, and he began playing it in concert, but he had his slide guitarist do some of the solos. When Duane Allman of the Allman Brothers heard that slide, it inspired him not just to learn good. I mean, he already knew guitar. It inspired him to learn how to play slide guitar. And it became a mainstay of the Allman Brothers live shows. In fact, the Allman Brothers version of Statesboro Blues that we all know was not on a studio album. It was on a live album. It was on Live at the Fillmore East, and it's the introductory to Live at the Fillmore East. And the Allman Brothers played it throughout their career until they disbanded in 2014. The surviving members of the Allman Brothers still play it. I've heard Government Mule do it. I've heard the Tedeschi Trucks Band do it. I'm sure that Othniel Bummer's the bass player who's still touring. I'm sure he does it as well. But that's the story of Statesboro Blues by the Allman Brothers and by Blind Willie McTell. Next up, we got Turn, Turn, Turn. So we go from blues rock to folk rock. The Byrds version is the one everybody knows, but it was not written by the Byrds. It was written by Mr. Pete Seeger in the late 50s, and it's based on a verse of the Bible, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. And the Byrds were originally a folk band, and then they added electric instruments. So their arrangement is very much the same arrangement that Pete Seeger has, except it's been electrified with that 12-string Rickenbacker guitar that Jim McGuinn plays. And it was the title track to their second album. And it hit #1 in the U.S. charts. And everyone's very familiar with the Byrds version, not so familiar with Pete Seeger's version. Little story, though, about Pete Seeger is he donated 50% of the royalties that he makes for the song to Middle Eastern charities. The reason he says that is he says, I didn't write the lyrics. The lyrics were written by this guy in the Middle East 3,000 years ago. So he doesn't feel like he deserves the whole 100% of the royalties for the song because it was written by, he says it was written by somebody else. It was in the Middle East, in Palestine and Israel 3,000 years ago. So I'm going to give the royalties for my song, or at least 50% of the royalties, to the Middle Eastern charities, which I think is kind of cool. Okay, up next, our last song is Twist and Shout. Now, I put that it was made famous by two people, two different groups, the Isley Brothers and the Beatles. The Beatles were actually influenced by the Isley Brothers. However, the original group that wrote it, or that recorded it, they didn't actually write it. It was written by the record company. The record company said, here's a song, record it. Was a group called the Top Notes. And the only thing notable about the Top Notes is that they were the first group to record Twist and Shout. They were an R&B duo. There's only two of them from Detroit. And I've not been able to find their version. But from what the reviews I heard, it was like a Latin beat to it, and the producers didn't. And eventually, the producer said, "Oh, it's really bad." He later rearranged it for the Isley Brothers, and the Isley Brothers version is the base of it is what we know. The Beatles heard the Isley Brothers and recorded it, put it in their live shows. When the Beatles were recording their first album, which was called Please Please Me, they literally just took their live stage show and recorded it as an album in the studio. It took them all day. Nowadays, it takes months, weeks, months to record an album. The Beatles recorded their first album, Please Please Me, in one day. And the last song they recorded for Please Please Me was Twist and Shout. But by the end of the day, John Lennon had been singing so much that his throat was sore. And they recorded Twist and Shout in one take because John Lennon couldn't sing after that. They tried a second take, but John Lennon's voice was just so bad that it didn't do anything. So Twist and Shout is one of the most famous one-take songs in music history. And it went on to one of their first hit. I'm not going to say the biggest hit because the Beatles had a ton of big hits, but their first hit was Twist and Shout. Okay, so what do you think? In the comments, let us know what you think. You know of any other cover songs that are more famous than the originals? And I actually just wrote down in my notes, I wrote down some other songs that are more famous than the originals. Nothing Compares to You by Sinead O'Connor, originally done by Prince. Proud Mary by Ike and Tina Turner, originally done by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Trouble No More, Allman Brothers song. First song they actually sang and the last song they sang when they broke up. Trouble No More was originally done by Muddy Waters. And I Shot the Sheriff, that was a Bob Marley song, but the more famous version is by Eric Clapton. So let me know if you can think of any other songs where the cover has become more famous than the original. Also, let me know what subjects you want me to cover on Hits Rock Review. And next time I am on the BarRoom Neon Project, I will promise I will be there live. I'm going to do a segment on supergroups in rock history. So, hope you enjoyed this. Until next time, keep on rocking in the free world. See you later.